This is Keith Norris, you guys. He is
How's it going?
Theory to Practice over on Instagram. Do you hang out on Instagram a lot, or
No,
where
I don't. Yeah, I just social media to me is, I kind of dip my toe in and get back out, and I just kind of play around with it. I don't have any. Michelle has someone who runs her personal account, right? So she's really into it and she leverages it for business, but I really don't. I just kind of play around with it.
So Michelle is his wife, you guys.
Right.
He and her are the co-founders of the Paleo FX conference. If you've never heard of that one before, or if you've heard of it and you just didn't see a face, there's Keith Norris. He's one of the co-founders, along with his lovely wife, Michelle. Now, can we talk about that for a second? Because you had to cancel this year for all the obvious reasons with Corona. What's going on with 2021? Is it just all up in the air because it's just such a dystopian society right now?
It is all up in the air because, yes, it is a dystopian society right now. We don't know. We don't have any clue whatsoever. We had to cancel the 2020 event because of the impositions that were put on us back in March by the city of Austin that we couldn't fulfill, namely that we had to prove that we wouldn't have, I think it was less than 1,000 at that time, less than 1,000 people under one roof. And we were like, that's not going to happen. So
several thousand every year. So
right. Yep.
How do you, even if you did have to implement that draconian of a cut in the number of people, you'd have to raise the price, I guess, to naturally lower it.
Yeah.
Or what would you do?
It was just, there was no way to do it. I mean, we have over 250 exhibitors that come out, and for them to travel all the way out for less than 1,000 people, that's not worth it to them.
Well, and they're including them as well. So those people so you're really only talking, after you got all your staff and volunteers and everybody, maybe 500 people
right.
from the public.
Right. And it was a wash. As soon as we saw, if your listeners know the South by Southwest conference that takes place, it's a massive interactive music and film conference that takes place in Austin, or took place in Austin every year, except for this year. As soon as South by Southwest, they were in negotiations with the city and they couldn't meet the city's requirements. And we knew the handwriting was on the wall at that point. And they were, then they were just going down the line to each conference and laying out the stipulations. So,
and the bad part that most consumers don't realize, as an organizer, you had to put down deposits on a lot of things, including the Palmer Event Center there in Austin, which ain't cheap. Talk to you.
Right. We paid in full for everything up front. That is event production. You have to pay in full for everything up front, which is risky business in normal times.
Right.
Event production is not easy. And yeah, so I know everybody is hurting at this point. The economy's hurting. Most everybody I know is hurting, unless you're in an online niche that is just performing well, because you just got lucky, and for whatever reason, boom, hey, I'm sitting pretty. But everybody else I know, especially brick and mortar, especially events, especially travel, anything surrounding those is just devastated. If you can't put on an event, that is your business.
Oh, so think about college football right now. They're dropping like weeds, and it's or dropping like flies, pulling them up like weeds. I mixed two metaphors there, sir. But yeah, you're right there in a college football town. That's going to devastate Austin's economy. I live here in South Carolina, Clemson. Right. Clemson only exists. The town of Clemson only exists because of that friggin' football team. People coming into town, and they go in droves, and there's hotels there only to serve the people that come to watch the football game in Death Valley. So it's this is huge, bigger than I think people are even thinking about right now.
And they're not, and that's part of the problem, is they're not thinking about the ramifications of this whole thing and tying it back to risk mitigation. Are the economic shutdowns, the lockdowns, everything that we're doing, is that worth the damage we've done to the economy? And this is part of the observation, right? So why this particular outbreak? Why not 3 years ago or whatever it was, H1N1, all of these other flu strains that have come down the line? why this particular virus did everything go crazy. I have my own ideas, but
into those here in a second. But yeah, I mean, it's and I've been posting some stories on my own work recently about how, oh, this was probably with us even before it was officially named COVID-19. So therefore, people's exposure to other coronaviruses were naturally boosting their T cell production and antibodies, so that by the time it hit, yes, it hit the most vulnerable when it first came. That always happens in every flu season. Who dies the most? It's the older people and the people with comorbidities. So this is not new in as much as this has happened before. It's just got a bright light on it right now, because that's all the media talks about is cases and deaths.
That's exactly right. And, you know, for everything that I do revolves around observation. I step back, I look at all the input, I look at my surroundings, and I just constantly ask, does this make sense? Does this make sense? Does this make sense? And I think everybody should do that. I don't care what conclusion you come to, but please question the narrative. Do you think that you are being fed a true narrative? That should be question number one. Might there be a reason or an incentive for you to be fed a false narrative? Might there be a reason for that? Might there be a reason that you are being fed this narrative and you are being controlled? Might there be a reason for that? For instance, just look at the numbers. Just look at the numbers. Does this make sense relative to the numbers that we're seeing? Just ask that simple question.
Well, and here's the thing too, Keith. They want to talk about the number of people that have died from the coronavirus, which as of the recording of this is right at 160,000 people. We can argue about how many of them are actually COVID deaths versus died with COVID, which is a totally different distinction that they're not making any distinction of. But let's just pretend like that number is correct. Why aren't we looking at the 600,000+ people that die from heart disease every year? Why aren't we at the 450,000+ people that die of cancer each year? That's 1,800 deaths a day, heart disease. That's 1,450 deaths a day from cancer. And yet coronavirus, COVID-19, is 700 a day and going down, because the more they test, the more they realize, oh, not many people are dying from it. Thus, why is it the pandemic and those other two things, which we know doing our work for so long, is metabolically related, is health?
Hey, my dogs are
the dog is the coronavirus. It just sneaks up on you.
Right. They decided this is what they do. They're quiet until I push the play button, and then they want to go nuts and fight.
What happens is your voice changes. It's like a tone change, because my cats do the same thing when I start doing my Jimmy Ranch show. They're like, oh, he talked to us.
But no, I get exactly what you're saying. And this, you know, and the counter argument to that is, well, those aren't contagious diseases. Totally get that. And that could be, you know, we can talk about that. But what about auto accidents? How many people die per year in an auto accident that was nothing of their doing? They were just wrong place, wrong time, right? Yep. That is a kind of the same thing, right? So why are we not limiting driving? Why don't we outlaw driving? That to me is way more dangerous than any kind of contagion right now. Right. I mean, how many people a day do we lose to auto accidents? And I have argued your point too about the comorbidities and the heart disease and obesity and diabetes that the government has been unwilling to even look at, and even now still unwilling. Has the government or anybody in a position of power come out and said, hey, look, do you want to do something to boost your immunity? Instead of wearing a stupid mask and social distancing and all of this other BS, what can we do to boost our immunity naturally? Nothing. Crickets on that front. Crickets.
Yeah.
If there's a reason for that.
I've said as much, and it's just so simple to tell people, get out in the sunshine, go move some, eat real food, try to, decrease your stress. All of these things we know are natural immunity boosters, and then they want to silence voices that are talking about alternative things besides a vaccine. All we're hearing in the mainstream is vaccine, 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 rush, 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 rush. What are they even calling it? Operation Warp Speed is what they're calling the vaccine. I'm like, I don't want a warp speed. I want proper speed to make sure it's safe before you put it out the market. But hydroxychloroquine has been vilified. All of these kind of alternative therapies that are dirt cheap, and real doctors are being told, I can't even prescribe it because they won't allow me to fill it at the pharmacy.
Right. It's crazy. It is absolutely crazy. And again, just step back and ask yourself, why? Might there be money involved? Might there be a motive involved? Why would anyone in their right mind want to silence or shut down a viable option to a vaccine? A drug, by the way, that has been on the market for years and has been used for years and is, in fact, over the counter in some countries.
Oh, yeah. We shipped 2 million doses to Brazil about a month ago. And it's like, oh, well, America won't allow us to fill it, so let's send it somewhere where it can be put to good use. Like, Americans aren't seeing those stories. And that's kind of the frustrating thing, too. By the way, I want to get your background, why you're such a skeptic, because you have some critical kind of thinking in your military background. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, Jimmy, I came out of the womb, I think, being a skeptic and just asking questions. And I've talked about this to people, too. I mean, and I've talked about this with people, too. What is it in someone's makeup that just makes them naturally not trust authority, not trust the narrative that is being told to them? They want proof, right? And I didn't know this as a kid. I was just constantly asking. I was curious, constantly asking questions. And most of the time I didn't like the answer. The answer didn't fulfill something in me that made whatever that trigger was within me go, oh, okay, yeah, I get it. That makes sense.
Sound true. It wasn't true to you.
It didn't feel true to me. It didn't ring true. So I constantly questioned, just all the time, questioning. So that's part of my DNA. I studied political science and psychology in college because that was an area that I could really dive into. I wanted to learn the psychology of what makes human beings tick and what makes human beings tick in groups. Political science, what does that look like? So there was that. Then I went into the military, and in the military, I went to a number of evasion tactics schools or training. The purpose of those schools is if you get captured, this is what's going to happen to you. They are going to try to worm into your mind and mold you in such a way to where they can use you as an asset. And this is how they're going to do it. It's textbook how they do it. When you look at that and you look at what's going on right now, that, Jimmy, is mind control. It's textbook. It's 101. In fact, I've said if it were a football play, it would be a simple fullback dive. This is nothing complicated. This is so very basic. And the people who know what that looks like can see it. You can see it a mile away. You can see it forming like a storm coming over the horizon. You see what's happening. But those who aren't hip to it get sucked right into it. They get sucked into the narrative. And it's a slow boil. I hate to use that metaphor because it's so cliche, but it is a slow boil. And this, Jimmy, has been going on for probably almost 100 years. This didn't crop up just overnight. This is a slow building boil. And right now it's getting exponentially hot in the pot.
Let's put some practicality in a real life example of what you're talking about here. Give us an example of something that people are believing, but you see it differently.
Let's just look at masks. Just the simple idea of masks, right? And we have this huge debate about whether they are effective enough. So the first question is, are they effective, right? Is this an effective measure against a virus? A virus. Okay, there's a couple of types of masks that might be effective against a virus. Is anybody wearing those? No. right? You're told to wear anything. It doesn't matter, a handkerchief, a whatever. It's totally ineffective. It makes no difference whatsoever. In fact, if you look at the trends of the virus, when mandatory mask implementation, when it was implemented, no change whatsoever, none, nothing. But what does it do in a practical sense? It gets you accustomed to something outside of your norm. Now the norm is cover your face. Cover your face. And not only that, but look down upon that person next to you who's not wearing one. Shame them, guilt them. Why are you not wearing a mask? You don't like humanity? That whole narrative just worms into your mind.
And then for those who do wear the masks, everybody is now faceless.
Faceless, exactly.
That has been so sad, Keith, when I've gone into stores and I watch all these sad eyes. You could just see humanity is crippling right before us. And it's like, we weren't meant to not see our smiles and crinkle toes and all the expressions. Like, people don't realize how much you communicate with this area right here. Now, you communicate with your eyes too, but all in a lot of people is just sadness, fear. They just don't know what to do. Speaking of the mask, by the way, right before we came on the air, Duke University just released a study about masks, and they found the ones that are like the bandana that go down towards the neck and up actually allow droplets in. They did like little laser kind of looking at that, and they still get in. And so it's like, okay, they're just telling people wear a mask, but there's no proper use of the mask. I see all these dumbasses pulling it below their nose. It's like, you might as well not wear a mask at all if you're going to pull it below your nose. And then the eyes can still get droplets. So it does.
I'll tell you this about pulling it down below the nose. I do that. And there's a reason why I do that, because I am not going to stew in my own exhaust gases. I'm not going to do it. I will not do it, because that, in my mind, is way more harmful.
If you had your druthers, you wouldn't wear a mask at all.
My druthers, I wouldn't wear one at all, but I do have to go into a store every now and again, and things like that.
But nobody says a word. If you pull no mask on, they will eviscerate you.
Right. How about walking into a restaurant? You walk into a restaurant with a mask. The second you sit down, you pull the mask off. What kind of sense does that make? It makes zero sense. It's all kabuki theater. And this is what it's meant to do, in my opinion, right? This is totally my opinion as an observer. This is meant, Jimmy, for me to look at you as a disease, as a potential carrier of disease. I don't trust you, because you may infect me. Not just you, but you and you and you and you, and everybody around me is now suspect because you might infect me.
Right.
Think about that psychologically. Think about what's happening to children right now who are forced to look at individuals around them as potential carriers of disease. It may somehow affect them, infect them, or kill them. Think about it psychologically.
Or worse yet, you killed my grandma.
Yes. Just let that sink in for a little bit. That is part of mind control. That is worming into your brain. This is insidious. And to think that this has anything to do with health. I'm sorry, when you look at the total picture of what's going on, if this were about health, we would be doing massive studies on hydroxychloroquine and because that is the cheapest option right now.
Well, and here's the thing. NIH is doing a study right now on hydroxychloroquine. Nobody's talking about that. Oh, in fact, the drugs czar of America, we're done with hydroxychloroquine. We need to move on. And meanwhile, NIH is running a study on it. It's like, okay, give them the right dosage, mix it with zinc, give them the Zithromax, and let's see what that therapy does in the early treatment or as a preventative measure. Like, these are the things that people aren't hearing because social media. Can we go to social media a second? I know you don't go on there a lot.
Absolutely.
But you don't. I have to because of what I do for a living. But they are like shadow banning, and of course people think, okay, censorship and shadow banning, this is all brand new. Like last year, they changed the algorithm right around you guys had your event last year in April. That's when they changed the algorithm at Google. So you can't find certain alternative health stuff anymore. Dr. Mercola was most, I guess, the most prominent one hit. He saw a 90% drop in his traffic. Now, he still had hundreds of thousands of views, so he's not hurting, but he was getting a lot more. So they've been trying to silence alternative health voices, and now they're using the coronavirus as the excuse for it.
Right. And that is so true. Yes, back last March, April, I think it was more February, March, somewhere around in there is when that happened. We at PaleoFX saw a massive decrease in traffic. In everybody in this space, I'm sure you did too, Jim. Everybody in this space saw that massive decrease. If your listeners are dubious about that, just Google like alternative cancer treatments in Google and do the same thing in something like DuckDuckGo, and just check out the difference. Right. Again, just observation, asking questions, and see what comes back to you. And tell me what in your gut, what you think, what you feel, and just run with that thread and dig more and dig more and dig more. Yes, there is censorship going on in social media, Jimmy, big time. Now, people will come back and say they're private companies. They can do what they want. Okay. That's all cool. How much tax breaks have they gotten from the U.S. government? How much help have they gotten from the U.S. government? Quite a bit. Look at Amazon. Billions in dollars in revenue. You know how much taxes they paid last year? Zero. Jimmy, did you and I pay zero taxes last year? I bet not. I know I didn't. I bet you didn't either. And I bet every one of your listeners paid more than zero into the government. Yet Amazon paid zero. Tell me if they got some help from the U.S. government. And was it justified? The same thing happens with Google, Twitter, Facebook, all of that. So they can bring up we're a private company. You know what? If you want to claim that, give back every dime back to the government that you received in help and every tax break you ever got from the government. Now we can have that discussion. But right now, yes, you do fall under the censorship laws, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many other people, attorneys as well.
Yeah, it seems in the midst of the pandemic, if you're Amazon, if you're Walmart, if you're any of these kind of big corporations, you're allowed to thrive. Small mom and pop shops there in Austin, Texas, here in Spartanburg, South Carolina. I've seen stores closing galore all around me.
Left and right.
Can't survive. And meanwhile, churches are closed. I have a church down the road from me that I attend, and it can hold about 10,000 people if enough people came. They're only allowed to have 50 people. And it's like, I could go down to a casino up the road and the casino can be completely full. And I'm going, okay, this is weird. Like, is nobody like questioning that? Like, what makes the coronavirus less able to be spread in a Walmart compared to your church?
Right. Jimmy, that one spins me up probably more than any other, because that is a blatant First Amendment violation. Blatant. In Las Vegas, you can walk into any casino, and I think their capacity is like 50%. Ever how they measure that, which is crazy and BS anyway. They can't control that. And churches are limited. Tell me that is not a violation of the First Amendment. Same thing in California. And thank God there is a pastor in California, and I can't remember the gentleman's name right now, it escapes me, who is suing California for First Amendment violations. And I hope that this spreads like wildfire. And this is one thing, Jimmy, that I don't understand. During the civil rights movement in the 60s, the churches rose up in the South. This was part of the large grassroots movement in the South during the civil rights movement. Is they banded together, rose up, and demonstrated. And I don't understand why the same thing is not happening in churches today. I don't understand that. because they could make a huge impact. Can you imagine, Jimmy, a 10,000 person church here? There are mega churches in Texas that could just say, you know what? First Amendment violation, we are meeting. Do something about it. You need to throw 10,000 people in jail. Good luck. Try. That was the same tactic the civil rights movement used in the 60s. You just overwhelm the system.
I wonder if it's still in that building up period of anger. Like, you would think, Keith, by now they would have seen, okay, what's going on and all the things we've been talking about so far. But I wonder if they're, okay, we're going to give a little more rope. We're not sure where this is going, a little more rope. And at some point, it's just going to be, bam, we're going to buck the system. I think happen sometime. It's headed that way. It has to, or the inevitable will happen.
Right. And that's the scary prospect, right? I would have thought back in April that we would have reached a boiling point. I know I did, but
yeah, but you're a lot more conscious of this than giving the benefit of the doubt that not everyone is as cerebral as Keith Norris, and that maybe by September, October, they're like, oh, come on, hang on, enough is enough. And I don't know. And of course, we can't ignore the elephant in the room in this whole conversation of 2020. The presidential election is obviously having some impact on the way that people are treating this in some states versus other states. And of course, I don't want to make this a political thing. This is real talk, but I don't want to make it political, regardless of what your spectrum is on right or left, liberal Democrat or conservative Republican, whatever your leaning is. You've got to know that if it was any other year, we probably would not be saying the same things play out the way they are.
Right. And I totally agree. Every election year, something comes up, some kind of turmoil, and it's just gotten worse and worse and worse and worse over the years. It's just really reached a fever pitch this year. There's a lot at stake this year, a huge amount at stake. The U.S. is a pivotal piece in world politics, a pivotal piece. And to think that there is not influence and input from other countries into the U.S. trying to manipulate the playboard is naive at best. It's naive.
Yeah, and what's been frustrating too is the lack of leadership and authority of telling us what's going on. Because when you don't tell people clearly what's going on from on high, you leave it to their own devices. You leave Keith Norris and that wonderful brain of his to just spin, and people make up kind of story. Well, China obviously created COVID-19 in a lab and unleashed it on the United States so that it would destroy our economy. You hear all those things, and it's like, okay, it's kind of like Schrodinger's cat. It's both true and not true at the same time because we haven't opened the box yet.
It's totally the way it is. And so here's the thing too, Jimmy, is we have been, as a populace, lied to for so long and so often. People like me don't believe anything. I don't believe anything on face value. Absolutely nothing, especially if it comes out of a politician's mouth. Nothing. I am like, prove it to me. Prove it to me. I mean, in my lifetime, from Vietnam up until now, lie after lie after lie after cover up after lie after, Vietnam, Watergate. I remember coming home from elementary school and my mom watching the Watergate hearings on TV as I walked in. I mean, in an impressionable young mind. Oh, of course they're lying to you. Of course the president of the United States is trying to maneuver and scam. I lived in a military town. I saw people die in Vietnam, other kids' parents die in Vietnam, and then come to find out later, for what? For what? That made an impression on me, right? So I don't trust anything. Then we get in, let's not even talk about the health and wellness side of things, the government narrative there, right? There is no incentive, it seems to me, there is no incentive for the government those in power, not just the government. So you have the elites, the 1%, the people who really run the show. Why would they want a healthy populace? Why?
Yeah, especially when you have powerful interests there in the big food and big pharma, which you and I have talked about forever in the paleo and keto and carnivore kind of communities that have been out there. And I was going to say that a lot of us that have been around a while in paleo, in low carb, in ketogenic, and now in carnivore, we're all skeptical already naturally because of the lies we've been told about saturated fat, the lies we've been told about a lot of things in our diet that we know for sure, like vegetable oils are still promoted extremely hard as healthy. And yet you and I both know, we've looked at all the research, we've heard all the speakers at your conference and others about how inflammatory they are. And yet they never mention anything about that. So when they lie to you once, why do you believe anything they say in the future? Because past experience always dictates future performance.
It should at least make you question. So when the same entities tell me that a diabetic should eat a high carbohydrate diet because that's better for them and chase it with insulin made by a pharmaceutical, when the same entity tells me that and then tells me that I need to wear a mask, I'm going to question. And then tells me that I need to social distance. Why? Why? Why should I do that? Why should I wear a mask? Show me the numbers. Oh, why are you manipulating the numbers? Why is it when someone dies in a motorcycle accident and happens to have the corona antibody, they died of corona, not of a motorcycle accident? Why is that? Why would you try skewing the numbers that way? What kind of wool are you trying to pull over my eyes, and why? I'm sorry, I'm not going to believe the narrative just because somebody in power says it's so. In fact, if somebody in power says it's so, I'm going to question it even harder.
Keith, why don't you think we have more whistleblowers when it comes to the COVID cases? I know a lot of doctors are trying to get their message out, but the video's up 10 minutes and then it's down and they can't really have it stay up. What are the alternatives other than your own private site? But then how do you get the message out there that it's on the private site?
Right. That's part of the quagmire that we're in right now. Right. And this is why, Jimmy, I say this was a slow and methodical buildup. Right. The whole thing about getting people on social media. Are you familiar with Robert? Oh, God, what's his last name?
Kennedy?
No, Childandre. I can't think of the guy's last name. I'll think of it here in a bit. It'll pop into my brain if I quit thinking about it. Anyway, he does much work on human psychology and the psychology about decision making for sure. And what he found was normally people come to a decision, right? And then they defend that position because that becomes part of their identity, right? Whether it's in politics, whether it's whatever stance. Then they defend it. Then they cherry pick information to defend that versus keeping an open mind and searching the landscape with an open mind and going, oh, I've got new information. I need to change my position. I thought one way today. Today I think another way. I got more information, which, by the way, is one thing I love about the paleo community. Right? New information comes in. I've changed my mind. I've got new information. By and large, people are not that way. That's human psychology. What social media does is double down on that.
Right.
Now you have a Facebook account with 5,000 friends. What are you going to do? Be wishy-washy? No. You're going to double down on that opinion. And so it just starts separating out different factions. When you separate out different factions, that is an easy population to control because I'll sick your faction against that faction. Boom. Distraction. Noise. I'll sick this faction against that faction. Distraction. Noise. This is why at Paleo FX we have been so adamant about bringing in vegans and vegetarians. Why is that? You'd think that's two totally different factions. Well, no. We agree on 90% of the issues. We probably disagree on 10%. And when you get down to nuts and bolts, we disagree on the one simple fact that I find it within my spirituality okay to take the life of another sentient being to nourish me. And the other side doesn't. That's one point. And we can debate that, but we can still come together on those other 90% issues and make a change in the world.
They can have my kale. I'll take their steak. So we're
That's
good.
totally fine. And Jimmy, I have dear, my best friend is a vegetarian. My best friend. And I love him. He loves me. And he's just not, that's his spirituality. And I'm totally cool with it. People do things for their spirituality all the time that aren't necessarily best for their health. And he understands, he gets it. And he supplements accordingly to be able to deal with that. So very cool. But that division of groups of people, that is one of the easiest ways to control people, which is why when you get in North Korea and Vietnam, what would they would pit POW versus POW. Did you know that Jimmy said this about the US? What do you think? Just pit constantly. It's a mind screw, right? Just over and over and over.
And they've done the same thing in America between the races. I mean, I've watched this unfold in my entire lifetime, watched this whole kind of butting of heads with race relations, and it would explode. I remember the Rodney King verdict and all the riots in LA that happened. Oh my gosh, that's crazy. That was not crazy compared to 2020.
Right.
And it just seems like they just keep ginning up that it's a black-white thing, and it's really not that at all.
I don't think it is either. Now, is there underlying racism in this country? Yes. I mean, we have a history of that.
I live in the South, just like you.
Yeah. And there's an underlying, and so my point on the racism thing is it's a spectrum. It's not a quote unquote black-white thing. It's a spectrum. There is the unconscious subtle on one side, and the very conscious, very overt over on the other side. And it's a spectrum of racism, right? So for instance, I live in a mostly white neighborhood. If I were to see a black young man running down the street, that might catch my eye, right? Unconscious, subtle. Whereas if I saw a white kid running down the street, I might not even think twice of it. It's unconscious and subtle. Now I might catch myself and go, oh yeah, okay. But for that instant, I'm going to look, right? And
it's human nature to do that.
Nature, yes, it's totally human nature.
You weren't looking that he was a black kid. You were just seeing, oh my gosh, your brain is so trained to know what normal should look like that when normal didn't go by, you're like, wait a minute.
Right. And so there's all this spectrum. Now, what I think is going on, what I'm pretty sure is going, just from my observation, is there are powers that be that is a great divide, right? That is the most obvious divide that you can find in a human population. Color, culture. Those are easy to pit against one another. You create situations that pit those against it, and you just stand back. It's like a football game, Jimmy. You get somebody to roll into Clemson, now you got a game, right? Yeah. Same thing is happening. If you are organizing the stage, and believe me, there are powers that be that have the ability to do this, and they are very, very well at orchestrating these things. Takes nothing away from the horror of seeing somebody die. Takes nothing away from that. But I think we need to ask the deeper question of, and it may come out that, these things are just acts of random racism. I don't think they are. I think they are orchestrated acts of racism that double down on the problem. Is there a problem there? Yes, there is a problem there. Magnified times 10 by the orchestration of it. And so how do we get out of that?
Right. And there's also forces at play that don't like America. I mean, we have to admit that as well. There are people, they don't like the way America was founded because it was racist, because all the founding fathers were okay with slavery and the whole kind of how systemic racism started in America, blah, blah, blah. And I'm not diminishing that if that's what people believe, but there are people that think we were so bad in the founding that they want to just totally dismantle what America is. And I think most average everyday Americans, they don't want anything like that to happen to the country. And yet this minority, which is growing, is trying to do exactly that.
Well, if you look at the background of how these people are educated and trained, right? It's just another version of Marxism, where traditional Marxism looks at sees the world as the oppressor and the oppressed. Under Marxism, the oppressor was the person who had the money, the land, that type of control, and the oppressed was the person who did not, right? So you had the moneyed against the not moneyed. Now, this new version of Marxism, the new woke critical theory, if you will, teaches that the oppressor are identities, right? And the easiest identity to pick is white versus everybody else, right? Now, as in all theories, is there some truth to that? Yeah, there probably is, right? You can't rewrite history. Our country was founded from people who escaped England for religious persecution. You can't rewrite that. That's how the country was founded. But I would also argue, too, that I think Winston Churchill said that democracy is the worst form of government except for everything else. And he was so true on that. Any form of government is sticky and clunky, and there's problems with it, and it has to constantly be reworked to get it to function enough to give people freedom, if that's what we're looking for. That's what I'm looking for. And democracy is the best of those solutions thus far. Just look at the track record. Look at the track record of communism. Not a very pretty sight. Not at all. And yet, this is what this faction wants to move towards. I'm sorry, I am not playing that game at all. Not at all.
Well, you devalue people's worth. Like if we had a truly socialist, communist kind of society in America, what would be your motivation to get up in the morning and go work? Right now, you have great motivation. Both of us are entrepreneurs and have both been highly successful at doing that. You know, if you didn't give me the incentive that when I woke up in the morning and started doing my work, that I could earn potentially this much money. I'm down here, but I have the potential to earn here if I work hard enough at it and hone my craft and get good at what I do and everything. I should be compensated for that. But under that, I guess, mode of thinking of socialism, communism, no, you're not allowed to be here because you didn't get there without the help of a lot of people that should have equal ownership over that success.
Right. And the terrifying part of that is who makes those decisions.
Right.
Right. Now, in the communist mindset, socialist communist mindset, they have this idea of the person or the ideology they want to support. Okay, very cool. What happens 10 years from now when that person's out? What happens then? Do you think you're going to fare very well? I can tell you traditionally what happens in communism. Those are the first people that get executed, the people that usher in the system. So they should think about that. And that's history, which, by the way, why do you think they want to erase history? Because it doesn't shine a very good light on every other attempt at communism, socialism. It's not fared well. They have a hideous track record. The death toll is immense. And again, does democracy have problems? It sure does, right? It certainly does. But your chances of maintaining your freedom, your chances of advancement are much, much better. Just look at the track record, right? We went from a country that fought a civil war over slavery to a black president pretty damn quick, right? So tell me that this country is broken. I don't believe it. I don't believe it at all.
Yeah, are we headed to another civil war?
I don't know. I can say this: if the idea is between communism and democracy, it's one I'm willing to fight. That's a hill I'm willing to die on, Jimmy, for sure.
I think that's the one. I mean, it's not a black-white thing this time. It's totally philosophy on where the country should be.
Right.
And you've got people that say, no, we like the way the country was founded. The U.S. Constitution has been very good for our country. That people say that. And then you got other side that say, no, that's the worst. It's a bad country. It treated people bad. It talked about all men created equal, but all men weren't created equal. Thus, it's illegitimate from the start. So we need to rip it up and start all over again and create a socialist communist society. Right. So yeah, if you have those two factions, I think it's inevitable we're headed for a crash.
Right. I tell people all the time, Jimmy, I didn't risk my life for 9 years in the military to watch this experiment unravel from the inside out. It's not going to happen on my watch.
Did you ever imagine this would happen in your lifetime?
I didn't. No, I really did not. I was kind of watching what was going on in the universities, what was being taught in the universities years ago, and thinking it was, that's curious that there is this new resurgence of the want to move towards a communist socialist political scheme. I thought, how curious. Why would they ever do that? And I thought, college kids, they go through that phase of, whatever. I went through a weird phase too when I was in college. Okay, it's part of the experimentation thing. And then you get out into the real world and you figure out what the real world is. And you go, oh, okay, right, let me straighten up and dial into the real world, because this is how I operate in the real world. And then it all starts to make sense to you. But what shocked me was the veracity of how that thought spilled into corporate America, and especially the media. Especially the media. The media is so biased towards that way. It's incredible.
Where it's spilled into? It's spilled into the public schools. I was watching earlier this week.
Education, yes.
Lawmaker in Illinois is calling for the abolishment of history until they can rewrite the history books. And I'm going, this is what you were talking about with the pulling down the statues and removing history. If you remove history and take it away, you actually are destined to repeat it. And this is the thing that nobody remembers, that when you forget about what bad things have happened, you think you've abolished them forever. No, you're not keeping it as a reminder of mistakes that were made. That I've made mistakes in my life, a lot of mistakes in my life. I remember every one of them, and they guide me as I continue forward in my life. If I didn't have a memory of them, guess what, Keith? I'd be apt to repeat them.
Right. I mean, all you have to do is look at the most recent example of this, the Cultural Revolution in China during the mid and late 60s, and look at the playbook of what they did. Infiltrate education, tear down history, and rewrite it according to what they wanted written. I mean, just look at that playbook, Mao's Little Red Book. Just if you ever want to kind of check out what's going on here, it's the playbook of what's attempted to be done here. Now, we do have the luxury of some people are awake and fighting back ferociously against this. Where in China, there wasn't much opposition because they were so far down the road already. The opposition was just easily extinguished. But that same playbook is being enacted right now. It's the same playbook, just the same thing with the mind control thing. It's the same playbook. It's 101. I mean, this isn't anything crazy. And one other thing, Jimmy, on the erasing history and judging the forefathers on their sins, right? The ironic thing to me is people will make that argument while they're wearing, Nikes and clothes that are made with slave Chinese labor. You and I are having a discussion on technology made with the same slave Chinese labor. We are driving in cars that are emitting just god-awful amounts of carbon into the atmosphere. We throw trash everywhere. We've trashed the oceans. I wonder how we're going to be judged in 300 years. People should ask themselves that. How are you going to be judged in 300 years? You're judging this person on operating in a system 300 years ago. I'm sure you're going to be judged fairly in 300 years' time. They should ask themselves that question.
Right. One thing about 2020 that I don't think has gotten enough attention is with all of the COVID-19 and the race relations and the bombing in Beirut that happened and all the things, what are we being distracted from?
That is a $1,000 question right there, Jimmy. With all of this going on, what is really happening behind the scenes? I don't know. I know something is going on. These distractions aren't put up just for play. There is, in my opinion, major power grabs being attempted behind the scenes. You keep the public distracted with all of this BS, and you can make these maneuvers behind the scenes. It seems to me like a major power grab.
By who?
By those who would like to control the entire world.
And there's a lot of world organizations that would love that.
There is a lot of world organizations. There are, you just think of the, Jimmy, of the banking elite. I mean, we haven't even talked about the banking system, and this is incredibly, the whole banking system is incredibly corrupt. One might ask the question, why were we never taught this in school about the fiat currency and about the Federal Reserve and how the World Banking Organization works and who stands to profit from that? Create fiat currency out of thin air. You just print money, and then you charge people interest on that fake currency. And who gets paid that interest? The banking elite gets paid that interest. Jimmy, that would be like me and you just creating, I don't know, fake wooden nickels and putting them out in circulation and charging interest on that and getting paid in currency. That's a pretty good scam. That's a scam on epic proportions. Just as an example, those people would love that system to continue into perpetuity, just forever. They don't want that system rocked. And then there's minor people and organizations below that would love to maintain control of where they are. And the U.S. is the pivotal player in this whole system. If the U.S. goes down, everybody's going down.
The most interesting thing for me observing everything happening, Keith, and it sounds like your dog is upset by the bankers as well. It sounded like America really kind of is the central holder of all of the world economy staying together. And I don't think enough people are giving that credence. Now, China is a very strong economic power as well. I don't want to discount them. But other countries, they pale in comparison to the buying power that is America. And so if you destroy America, you're basically, and you're a foreign entity, you're cutting off your nose to spite your face.
Yep.
So like, what's the end? Where are we going with this?
It's hard to say. I don't know, and I try to think about this and speculate. All I know is, or what I feel, what I observe, is control and manipulation. And there's a massive effort right now at control and manipulation of the masses. Now, why? And then you just ask yourself, well, why would any entity want to control and manipulate the masses? And that has to be for profit incentive. Why else would you want to do that? And I mean, it all comes down to profit, right? You would have to manipulate this population somehow to control profit heading towards you. What's the other motive? It's not out, maybe it is out of motive to help the entire world. I'm a little bit skeptical on that. I think it is a profit motive somehow, some kind of way.
And what does the profit mean if you have no America anymore and the US dollar fails? I guess they're investing in gold, and gold has gone way up in price because so many people are buying it now, or there's a demand to buy it. I mean, it just seems odd that if that's the end game, that's kind of lame, but I guess it's typical of world history, what's happened all throughout history.
Right. I mean, whatever that commodity is, they are trying to control it. The most obvious would mean, financial, but it may be something else. I don't know. Why else would someone try to control this? And that's where you loop around into conspiracy theory, and then you loop back around to, well, I don't believe in conspiracy theory, so all of this whole charade must be for real. And that's where I go back to, no, this is for sure kabuki theater. And then we're back to the question to why. question, 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 question. Ultimately, I don't know the answer, Jimmy. I just know something does not feel right to me with this whole thing, knowing what I know, knowing what my experience is, my questioning mind, the fact that I and you and everybody else in the US has been lied to about everything for years and years and years and years. Something's up. And we deserve it. Not only do we deserve, it is our responsibility to question, which is something else I think has been washed out of the school system for a very good reason, right?
I have talked to kids 30 and younger. I'm 48 now. You're in your 50s, right?
55.
Yeah. So I talk to kids under 30. I just want to get a gauge for where their minds are and what they know. I ask them, like, you know, who was the 16th president of the United States? What's the Second Amendment? And I'm going, how do you not know this? You're a walking adult. And it just makes me know all the more that the dumbing down of education has been successful.
And look at how kids are taught nowadays. They are taught to answer correctly the question on the test, right? It doesn't matter what that answer is. Bam, regurgitate. Bam, regurgitate. Don't question. Do not question. If you question, you're likely to get the answer on the test wrong.
And that's
take in information, regurgitate. Take in information, regurgitate. Programming. Now, if you generation after generation after generation after generation has been taught that questioning equals shame and guilt because you're going to get the answer on the question, answer on the test wrong, you're going to get a bad grade, you're not going to get into the best colleges, yet all of this stuff, what are you going to do as a kid? You're going to answer the question the way you're told, even though it doesn't sit right with you. Doesn't matter. So you learn not to question. Your parents teach you not to question. And that just goes on and on and on and on. So now, when millennials are up against people questioning authority, they're like, what a freaking kook. The New York Times is telling me this. That has to be right. That has to be right. No one has the knowledge to question. They don't even know it's possible. They might know, you know, on a very, very, very topical level, but asking the deep, deep questions, the things that really trigger people, which is another thing, running up against information that's counter to your bias. Now that's considered hate speech. And that's considered, if you offend me verbally, I have to go into a corner and have a coloring book. And I can accuse you of all kinds of things because you've hurt my feelings by making me question. It's absurd. It's completely absurd. If we can't have a conversation and have two totally diametric opinions and discuss it
civilly, discuss. Yeah. Because used to, in the early 90s and all throughout the 90s, there was this show on CNN, back when CNN was relevant, called Crossfire.
Right.
They would bring on two people on opposite sides of an issue, and they'd say, gun control, go. And then they'd go at it. And at the end of it, they'd go out for a drink afterwards. It's like there wasn't this hostility. And, of course, that's born out of programming and conditioning to see somebody that believes different than you as an enemy.
Right.
If you're American, your enemy is not another American. It's not. It's people that would rather bring America down. The problem is we got a lot of those kind of people in our country now.
Right. That's exactly right. I mean, that's if you cede the ability to question authority, if you give that up and you give up the fortitude to be able to hold differing opinions in your mind and be able to deal with them without, pardon my French, losing your shit.
Right.
You're lost. You are now a pawn to the system. You are exactly a pawn to the system. Now, maybe you're okay with that. Maybe you like the system and you're okay with being told what to do. I guarantee you that system is going to change. That's the nature of things. It will change. And now where are you going to be?
And when it does, you conform.
Right. You will conform because now that's what you're taught. You will conform to whatever the system is because that's safe. And that's the other thing. People are just being inundated with safety. This is another Corona thing, right? Be safe, be safe, be, you know, all this safety, 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 over the top safety, helicopter parents, playgrounds that are padded, all of this stuff that's over the top safety, which has been beaten into us for years. Got to be safe, got to be safe, take no risk, yada, yada, yada. You know what? Life is risky. And a life lived fully is a life lived in risk. Otherwise, it's not worth living. Right. And I'm not saying go and, you know, skydive off the 3rd floor and expect to bounce off the ground. And that's not what I'm saying. But normal life is risky. Guess what? We've dealt with the flu for years and years and years. We've dealt with viruses the entire history of our humanity. We've dealt with this stuff. That's part of living. And I'm not taking away anybody who has died of flu, of coronavirus, of anything, H1N1, any pathogen, any disease. I'm not taking that away, but that is life. And we have to weigh risk versus return. Otherwise, Jimmy, we would never step foot in an automobile. Never.
Or just walk out our door.
Or walk out your door. Yes, we would never do it. At what point do we say all risk has been mitigated? You can't.
Unless you live in a bubble.
Unless you exactly. So what's the next step? What are we going to do after, you know, handkerchiefs and goggles and whatever? Is everybody going to wear a hazmat suit?
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds funny, right? But really? I mean, are we really going there? This time last year, if you would have told me that America would be on lockdown, walking around wearing masks because of a contagion that is no worse than the freaking flu, I would have said, you are smoking something. I don't know what, but you're nuts. There's no way that would ever happen. Here we are.
Yeah, 0.3% death rate. And that's assuming the numbers are correct. We don't know. That's the other thing that's made this really bad. But fearful is what people are. And they're just continuing to allow the powers that be that are trying to manipulate them, like what we've been talking about. They're allowing it. And so what we're saying here, guys, is open your eyes, start critically thinking if you haven't been already. And maybe that's new to some people to start thinking for yourself. It's natural within every human being to be curious, to ask questions, and to be critical of anything you hear rather than just carte blanche believing the first thing you hear, which is what psychologists say we do, Keith. When you hear something, the first thing you do is believe it. You don't analyze it. You believe it. Then you go back and analyze it later, maybe. And a lot of people never do.
Right. Critical thought is a skill. It really is a skill. It's a skill anybody can hone, but it is a skill. And the idea is whatever information comes to you, just weigh that against what your natural observation is and just question everything. Question, is that true? Do I believe that? Let me do some research on that. Let me look into that. You may come to find out that you totally believe it. Cool. But at least you've looked at it, you've researched it, you understand. Let me let this dog out real quick. She's killing me. Come on.
Bye, doggy. He's like, Dad, gotta go pee.
He's gotta go pee. Yeah. Go on with your bad self. Yeah, but that is your birthright. Like health is your birthright, so is the ability to question. Humans are naturally curious. Just look at kids, young kids, before they've been programmed, before any of that, they are naturally curious.
Why?
Why? Yeah. Going back to me, my mom would always joke, that was the first word you learned was why. It wasn't mommy, daddy, it was why. And I don't know why that. I just wanted to know the world around me. Why? Why? Why do we do this? Why do we do that? Why? It's just a constant. And I feel for my mom now because my daughter is the exact same way. And she drove me nuts when I was a parent. But I was like, okay, at least I love it. She is questioning everything, and we raised our kids to politely question everything that comes across your mouth. Everything. That is your right to question. It is the other person the entity, the agency to give you information to prove whatever point they want to prove, right? You go to the doctor, why? You know, why do I get this shot? Why that? Why that? Why should I take that medication? Why should I eat this food? Why should I believe you? Why should I believe the story in the New York Times? Why?
Oh, I have a feeling if you start questioning doctors like that moving forward, there's going to be kind of a shutting down of that. Here, just take the pill. Here, take the vaccine. It's for your own good. It's for the public good.
Right. Right. And, you know, you have to get over the aversion that you are offending somebody, which I think is another thing that's being taught to generations now, that if you question, you are offending. That's not the point. I love everybody. I love everybody to death. I will question everybody.
Even Michelle?
Still, yes. And Michelle and I have deep conversations, but that's part of what our relationship is based on.
Once you pick your teeth up off the ground, of course. So.
Right. Yeah.
What are you going to say?
I said, after I come out of the ring for another round, it's
exactly. Guys, he is Keith Norris. Go check him out. Theory to Practice. He's not on there too often, but when he does, you do some good stuff on there when you go on there. Definitely, he's an exercise expert, so go check him out. But co-founder, speaking of risk, in 2012, when you and Michelle said, hey, we got this idea to do this big conference, and if my memory serves correct, we had just had the Ancestral Health Symposium in LA, and you're like, we're going to do a conference in Austin, Texas in April, or no, it was even earlier. I think it was March the first year.
In March that year, yeah.
So we're going to do it in 6 months. I'm like, you're going, well, what? And you did it really fast, and you had, you know, many, it was one of the biggest conferences at that time. And then after that, explosion, thousands and thousands of people. So I hope for your guys' sake and for the sake of all of us, I miss going to those kinds of conferences and hugging people. Like, will people come back to these conferences again once it's allowed to happen again? Going on an airplane is going to be a rigmarole now. I mean, it's just going to be interesting watching all this unfold moving forward. We didn't solve anything here today, but hopefully we gave people some things to think about, Keith.
Right. And hopefully they will think, and hopefully they will question the narrative. That's, you know, and that's all I've ever asked of anybody. You don't have to agree with me. That's not what I'm asking. And, you know, and I'm willing to have a discussion with anybody about anything. But the one thing that I request is that you think critically. That's it, man. Just think critically about the narrative that you're being given, the narrative you're being fed, and see if that squares with you. And if it does, cool. If it doesn't, you might want to ask some more deeper questions. One question will lead to another, will lead to another.
So talk about anything. Let's see. Marvel versus DC. Just kidding.
Totally out of my realm. I'll have to do some research on that.
Well, thanks for being here today, bud.
Thank you, Jimmy. It was great talking to you, brother.